Now, the question is, whose side is the police on? Why do they seem to treat eco-warriors with kid gloves whilst hammering motorists who just want to get to work? The question arises as disruptive eco-warriors have caused more public frustration this week after protesters irritated drivers by slow walking in front of busy central London traffic, with one such individual stepping out of his vehicle to try and move the activist out of the way. However, the motorist received a warning from the police that if he were to attempt to remove the protesters, this would be treated as assault. So how far should the police go to prevent this disruption? And are such actions needed to stop hindrance to hard-working citizens up and down the country? And should the police actually be a bit more sympathetic when those of us trying to get about our ordinary lawful business may be pushing at the edges? Kelvin, do you get the feeling sometimes that the police aren't on our side?
I think it's quite shocking what's going on right now. So I admire the fact that in the last 3 years we've now got more police officers than we've ever had before. The question is, whose side are the police on in these difficult areas? I recognise that if you're a lowly copper, it's not you that's making these decisions. But what would be wrong with saying to those people, by the way, protest alongside the pavement, but do allow the traffic to flow through? But they won't do that. What they do is they are actually looking out to see whether a motorist loses his or her temper, and at that point say to them, one more time, matey, and you're arrested. And yet these people, I mean, this wasn't just one road, you know, in London. There were about 7 roads. And these people are thinking about it. They're choosing the main highways to disrupt you. And yet you, who are sitting there, you should have been at this meeting, you should have been at that hospital, you should have been on that building site. Actually, nobody gives a toss about you. But what they do care about is if you tear down as some kind of poster or something. So what has to be done? I think we need political leadership. Why can't Rishi say, just simply call in the Metropolitan Commissioner? He gets called in about everything else. Why not call him about that and say, this is not acceptable? And the Metropolitan Commission will say, well, the law says this. And if that is the answer, and it may well be the answer, then you say, the time has come. We have got to change the balance of power on the streets. It is not reasonable that people can disrupt your life, and yet if you try to correct it, you are the person that gets arrested. It is not reasonable.
Aaron, I'm very torn about this because I strongly believe in the right to protest as being part of our democratic right, but obstructing the King's Highway is also something that you're not allowed to do. So how can you allow legitimate protest without breaking other laws?
Well, first, it's important to say, I mean, I disagree with a few things Kelvin said there. A police officer is right to say to a citizen that you shouldn't commit assault, and they potentially would be committing assault. And I don't know if the officer said to that particular gentleman, you will be arrested if you continue to do...
But shouldn't the policeman be saying, come on, you've got to get out of the middle of the road because you're obstructing the King's Highway? Yeah. And the police are deciding to enforce one law but not the other.
Well, I think, look, you're a police officer, and one of the first things you have to do is obviously maintain public order. And you don't want to breach the peace. And any protest situation in policing parlance is a public order problem, public order situation, I would call it. And the first thing you don't want to do in that context is to escalate or inflame a public order situation. And I do think, particularly right now with the way the economy is going, lots of people are very upset about a bunch of things. I think, generally speaking, the Home Office, the Metropolitan Police Service think if we can get through the next 8 months without riots, small, localised or whatever, they'll be very happy. So the idea that you start to potentially inflame even smallish protests like this, I think actually is a very prudent thing to do. And look, these people have been in the game for a century and a half. They know what they're doing. So I think there's a logic as to why they did what they did and why they're allowing these protests to happen albeit that they're infringing the law, they're obstructing a highway, but they're not particularly aggressive or violent.
There is another view, which is the one that the judge took of the Just Stop Oil protesters at Dartford Bridge, of course, in which
undermines the point they're being softly treated.
Absolutely delighted to see, which was the one got 3 years and the other one got 2 years, 7 months. Now, these people by sitting on top of that bridge, caused 40 hours of damage, and so they threw the book at them. So it's not as though they can't.
The police stopped the traffic. Yes, the police thought the poor dears might be at risk and therefore stopped the traffic. I couldn't understand why they didn't just let the traffic carry on.
I don't understand why somebody they did a banner drop. One of them, like I say, has got 3 years. One's got 2 years, 7 months. The police obstructed the traffic, so I don't understand how them causing a public nuisance gets...
Well, look,
I find that astonishing. When we've got people who've committed sexual assault, there was one young man in Scotland he's 21 now. He assaulted a 13-year-old girl when he was 17. He didn't even get a custodial sentence. And then we have these two people doing a banner drop, and one of them goes to prison for 3 years. I found that outlandish.
This was a message.
Outlandish.
This was a message to these people, and I would love to see somebody who is literally blocking.
But then they're not being treated softly, are they?
Right.
That's undermining your initial point. You're saying they're being treated with kid gloves. Evidently, they're not.
No, that particular case, they're not. I would like to see these guys...
very much a one-off, though, doesn't it?
I would like to see these guys being produced to the courts and given lengthy jail sentences. Then they can decide whether they really believe in what they're saying.
But, Aaron, I want to come to your point, because I think it's a very important one. The police want to maintain public order. And therefore they are being soft with the protesters. But then they're not enforcing the law to the benefit of the people who are being stopped in the traffic. They're just assuming that they, out of their goodwill and their good nature, won't get so frustrated that they will break the law. That seems to me to be both a risk, but also unbalanced in terms of how you implement the law.
It's a dynamic situation, isn't it? I remember policing, for instance, in response to austerity in 2010, 2011, 2012. It was very assertive, very aggressive. I remember mass arrests in regards to the Olympic opening ceremony, in Tower Hamlets confronting the EDL, student protests, etc. By the way, in the majority of those cases, the police had to make payouts because they were doing illegal arrests. They weren't warranted arrests. So I think there's a double dynamic here. Firstly, they don't want to be making payouts to people, which they probably would end up doing because activists tend to know what their legal rights are and where the police have and haven't overstepped the mark. And then secondly, going back to the point I made a few moments ago, I do think because the wider political climate, there would be a concern about clamping down on protests. Now, for instance, if you had truck drivers stopping fuel distribution around the country in protest to rising energy prices, you might support that. Well, people here who don't like Just Stop Oil might support those people. Now, if those people started getting arrested for those protests, I think you probably have a rather different reaction. So,
well, hold on. Once an industrial dispute, this is a political dispute.
They're both political.
And no. One on the industrial, say the petrol drivers, they wanted more money. These people want to actually change the way that our country is run, and they want fresh laws.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, though, isn't it? That if it's a protest that is on our side, we suddenly say, "Oh, that's marvellous." And if it's a protest that we don't like,
it's not a fair point, man. This is a completely different point. Yours was an industrial point. Mine is a political point. I am not in favour of people simply standing in the middle of the road.
The route was agreed, and that is something that happens regularly.
No, I appreciate that, but I'm just trying to make my point here, which is, look, I'm anti-fox hunting. You're probably pro-fox hunting. If people were doing something similar to bring back, to repeal laws which were brought about by New Labour to make fox hunting legal again, and they were blocking a road, I wouldn't want them to go to prison for multiple years because I think it's a very unwise use of taxpayers' money. It's cheaper to send somebody to Yale than to jail, and I think it's an astonishing waste of police time and of the criminal justice system. So I understand your frustration, but I think this idea of sending people to prison willy-nilly, I just don't think it's going to work because there's lots of people and they're not going anywhere.
I am massively hostile to the fact that we do not send people to jails for longer, and those people, they deserve it.